I could only see that I was muted.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the broadcast. My name is Ben Frost. I'm the Professional Development Officer of the Northern New England chapter of APA and one of the coordinators of the Planning Webcast Series Consortium. I'll be helping to moderate today's webcast. Today is Friday, October 3rd, 2014, and we will hear the presentation Connecting Safe Routes to Schools to the Greater Community. For technical help during today's webcast, please type questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen or call the 1-800 number shown on your screen. For content-related questions that deal with the presentation, please type those questions into the questions box also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. We will answer those as time allows at the end of the presentation during the Q&A portion. On your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions of the Planning Webcast Series Consortium. I want to thank all of the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Transportation Planning Division. To learn more about all chapters and divisions, please click on the links shown on this screen. Here's a list of upcoming webcasts during October. We have a full slate of webcasts for the remainder of the year, and we're starting to schedule webcasts also for 2015. So we look forward to another great year coming up. You can register for any of these webcasts by visiting the Utah chapter website at the link shown on the bottom of the screen, utahapa.org/webcasts. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please visit planning.org/CM and go to your dashboard, select Activities by Provider. For this webcast, select Transportation Planning Division, today's host, and then select Connecting Safe Routes, etc., etc. You can also search for this event by the event number 28413. Today's webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits. You can also like us on Facebook, and that may be the best way to get up-to-date information on upcoming webcasts. We are recording today's webcast, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. A PDF also will be available of the presentation by visiting the ohioplanning.org website, and that can be found at www.ohioplanning.org/webcast presentations. And now to introduce today's speakers, I'd like to turn it over to my friend Gabriela Juarez of the Transportation Planning Division. Gabriela, it's all yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Ben. You have one of the most pleasant voices to listen to. I could have you read all my reports and enjoy them thoroughly. I wanted to thank all of our participants today and let you know that TPD, Transportation Planning Division, is out here providing this wonderful webinar for you today as part of our membership benefits, and we welcome all of you to do a webinar yourselves. Everyone works on amazing projects, and we're all planning nerds, so we want to hear about it, and we enjoy it thoroughly. And hey, that's an easy way to get some CM credits. So if you have any ideas for projects that you're working on, let me know, and we will set it up. With that, I'm going to introduce our amazing speakers that we have today. We're really excited about taking this perspective to the foreground today on safe routes to school. First presenting today, we have Carol Kachadorian, and she's a senior planner with over 30 years of experience in transit and multimodal transportation planning. She is certified in the National Complete Streets as an instructor. Her project work includes pedestrian master plans, access to transit plans, and safe routes to school program management, as well as travel plan development. And prior to joining her current company, Tool Design Group, Carol has spent 10 years working with the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. And while at Metro, she led various customer-focused efforts, such as planning for non-motorized access to the system. As the first manager of Alexandria, Virginia's Office of Transit Services, Carol was instrumental in creating DASH, the city's local bus system, and DOT, or DOT, its companion taxi-based paratransit service. Our second speaker today is Abby Matera, and she's originally from Waterbury, Vermont, and she has a background in sustainable community design and has spent the last 7 years working on safe routes to school services, including having helped with the startup and implementation of the Georgia and Vermont Safe Routes to School Resource Center projects. In her role, she works with a variety of school and community stakeholders to develop sustainable programs that enable and encourage children to walk and bike safely to school. She holds a Master's of Science in Urban Policy and Planning and is LEED certified, and also a certified instructor for Safe Routes to School, the national course. And our last presenter today is Anne Chineka, and I probably didn't pronounce that correctly, but she can correct me shortly. She is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator for the City of Tucson, which is currently a gold-level bicycle community, bike-friendly community. Anne established a Safe Routes to School program in Tucson in collaboration with the Living Streets Alliance, which is the local nonprofit advocacy group and tool design group. She has a master's in public administration and also served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Madagascar. So she's got lots of insight and a wonderful perspective. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Carol to take us to the world of safe routes to school. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you, Gabby. I'm very pleased to be here today. I got to move my presentation back just a tad. We were doing some practicing ahead of time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about safe routes to school as from the perspective of a planner, which hopefully most of our participants are. And I'm going to talk about the kinds of things to think about in terms of trying to participate in safe routes to school in your community. Safe routes to school is not just whether you have a crossing guard at the right locations. This is a crossing guard named Art, and he's at a school in South Carolina. He's really a great part of the community. It's also not just about whether you have bike racks and kids biking to school and parking in them. It's not even about whether you just have sidewalks so kids can walk to school. It's really much broader than that. And I want to talk with you about 5 things to think about as planners to involve the greater community in safe routes to school programs. The first is think about whether you're a small community or a large community. Think about whether your community is auto-oriented or complete streets oriented. Next, whether you really can look at the easy targets for safe routes to school or whether you can take a little bit harder look and look at targets which are really more in need. How your DOT distributes its safe routes to school money or whatever money they're using to support safe routes to school. Not the infrastructure money, but the non-infrastructure money. And lastly, talk a little bit about how you can reach up, reach out, reach down to make safe routes to school a thing for your whole community. I'm going to provide a framework for you and talk about these things from the safe routes to school programs that I've worked with. But certainly Abby and Anne are going to give you some much more hands-on, real-world experience that they have as well. So we'll start with small community versus large community. As a planner, in a small community, your safe routes to school team is likely to include all local leaders, your town manager, perhaps even your mayor, your chief of police, your superintendent of schools. In larger communities, your safe routes to school team and those that work on the safe routes to school projects are more likely to be leaders within that community. I'm going to talk about an example in Arlington County, Virginia. Arlington is a relatively large community, and yet they have a partnership with the county government and the schools to do TDM and site planning, TDM work and site planning. And this is another benefit that can happen in a larger community. You can really knit into the fabric of the larger community safe routes to school. The next thing to consider as a planner is if your community is auto-oriented or complete streets-oriented. I took a photo of this billboard in Sandpoint, Idaho, which clearly said they were a walk-in town, and they did have a lot of things around their schools and their parks that supported walking and biking. Some of the things that we think about in terms of auto-orientation versus complete streets orientation is level of service in terms of road classification versus level of comfort or stress. And this is a very quick series of slides that we use sometimes for level of service on an existing road that has bus service on it. And you can see that typically the level of service for a car is much better than the level of service for people walking or biking or taking the bus. But if you're a more complete streets-oriented community and you begin to add a few things, you can add a median, you can reduce the corner radius, you can add a leading pedestrian interval, you can add bus shelters, lights and trash cans, and eventually everybody kind of gets to, each mode kind of gets to the same place on that A to F scale. Bus service may be better, but this is an example of, depending upon the orientation of your community, how you can work to make a difference. And all of these things, when done near schools, help students walking and biking to school. Your community may also have a very active living set of programs. For example, Decatur, Georgia has an active living department. As you can see from their website, it includes parks, dog parks, their athletic fields. They also run their Safe Routes to School program out of their active living department. And their Safe Routes to School program includes things such as scheduling and running regular walk to school day events, walking school buses, for example, including publishing maps to walk to school. Another way that you can tell whether or not your community is auto-oriented or complete streets-oriented and knowing how you can approach promoting safe routes to school is just think about the interconnectedness of your school campus today with other community assets. And I'm going to talk about each of these images on the screen. The first one is what I call beyond the pale, where there is very little connection between what's happening in the broader community and the school. I've got some quotes here that I have heard working on Safe Routes to School projects. The first one was from a city engineer who came on campus as part of a walkabout, and he said, "Gee, I haven't been here for years." That's not what you want to hear. That tells you your community may not be as complete streets oriented as it could be. I also have had a school principal saying, we don't want the general public using our athletic fields. They belong to us. That's another sign that you have to work a little bit harder to get your Safe Routes to School program integrated with the rest of your community. I've also been in communities where the city planners say, we only use the school and the school grounds for school needs, so we don't need to really be concerned about how other people can get there. So this tells you this is the beyond the pale perspective in terms of auto-orientation or complete streets or an integrated community, interconnected community. On the other hand, here's an example. I did kind of a panorama from Google Maps of a school in Alexandria, Virginia that has a rec center and fields in one part of the campus, a school in another part of the campus, and a library in the third part of the campus. They're all connected. You can see there are bike lanes. There's very good pedestrian crossing facilities, and it really is a community asset. But you don't have to live in a particularly urban community to have that kind of interconnectedness. This is a piece of land in Pitt County, North Carolina, where, as you can see, there's some schools on the bottom. There's the Carolina Village of yesteryear, so there's a museum, there's a farmer's market, council on aging, rec department, and a community college greenhouse. Very multiple uses, very multi-generational uses. And they knew there needed to be connectedness between those, so they built some trails and they built a street crossing. Probably could add some rapid flash beacons, but they recognized that they needed to do more to connect all of those community assets together. Another thing to think about as planners in your community promoting and supporting safe routes to school is what schools you choose to work with. There are those easy target schools that are well resourced. You may already know somebody there, so it's an easy contact. They may have said, we want to start a safe routes to school program. Can you help it? Can you help us? They're reaching out. They're ready to participate, and you know there's a greater chance of having a successful program there. On the other hand, as planners, think about whether a better target is an under-resourced school where children are at risk for their personal safety while walking to school, either real or perceived, or whether the infrastructure for walking and biking is not as safe as it could be, but there are greater numbers of children walking to school. Schools where there's been a need identified, but due to the fact that the school is under-resourced, there's been no action. And as planners, you can really reach out to those schools, target them, and try to help. It can be considered an issue of equity and dignity for those schools to get a good safe routes to school program. Think of it in terms of this triangle that it's a little small, it's kind of hard to read, but the higher the level of activity at the school, the less direct work you need to do. The lower the level of activity at the school, the more work you need to do in order to make a safe routes to school program successful and sustainable. So in terms of picking that target, think of it also in terms of tailoring your safe routes to school program, tailoring the work that you do. Some schools may just need a walkabout if they have parents who are informed and capable of doing more. Some schools are ready to do their own comprehensive school travel plan. In Georgia, in response to these lower resource schools, we have developed a plan that we will do where the local government or the MPO really is the driver on it. That local government or MPO, we need to identify potential funding sources for identified infrastructure projects. And what the school does is commit to pedestrian and bicycle safety education. So think about what school you're working with and how to tailor your work to make safe routes to school there. Another thing to think about is the fourth thing to think about in terms of your work with safe routes to school is how non-infrastructure funds for safe routes to school are used. I will say as Safety Loop funds are being spent in states may be discontinuing their safe routes to school programs. They may be replacing some of the money with TAP funds. But where that non-infrastructure money does exist, I've seen two models. There's the DOT distributes the money model locally so that the money really is used at the local level to support safe routes to school. And then there's the DOT distributes goods and services money. And you might also think of this as the resource center model where staff is hired at the state level to support local programs versus the get the money out model where the non-infrastructure money is used to fund local safe routes to school coordinators. Neither of these is right or wrong. It's a matter of what works, and you as planners would need to understand how that happens in your community. So the resource center money is a model, as I said. Oftentimes there's state-level technical assistance through a school outreach coordinator, for example. That's what we call them in Georgia and in South Carolina. Oftentimes that resource center will buy in bulk incentive items and distribute them as an incentive for schools to participate. The resource center SOCs and others may also provide travel plan assistance, where they really write the plan, they help form a team, and they do a lot of the work to develop the plan. On the Get the Money Out model, as I said, that non-infrastructure money may go to fund local coordinators. So that may be your local contact as planners, or your local contact may be that funded coordinator. In Virginia, they use mini grants to encourage activities at the local level, and the local programs are the ones that decide how that $1,000 mini grant is used. And oftentimes there's a limited amount of swag. For example, in Virginia, they print and distribute Safe Routes to School banners that are handed out when a school participates in Student Travel Tally Week. That's what that STTW means. So the last thing I want to talk about is, as a planner, working with the schools to reach out, to reach up to your governor or your mayor, to reach down to local schools, others in the community, and down might not be the right word to use, but it kind of reach out, reach up, reach down, reach over is what we're talking about. So the example that I have from Virginia is of a reach out. We started last academic year funding Safe Routes to School division coordinators. And you can see here we've got the Virginia Department of Transportation partnering with the Virginia Department of Education. Virginia's state Safe Routes to School coordinators counterpart in the Department of Education is the person that heads their health and physical education specialists. The coordinators work underneath their health and physical education supervisors. And we have in Virginia what we call LTACs, Local Technical Assistance Coordinators, that provide some support, but it's really the support to the division coordinators where much of the work happens. This has been a very successful program and has really enriched Safe Routes to School programs locally. North Carolina DOT has partnered with their health department. They have the state health department. They have an active Safe Routes to School program funding 10 coordinators through 10 community transformation grants. They focus on education and encouragement, and you can see that their website really is branded as a partnership between the DOT and the Division of Public Health. You can see that while there are only 10 of these coordinators, they really do stretch across the state. And those are the 5 things I wanted to share with you. I want to thank you. This is actually a picture of me doing some field work in Savannah, Georgia, to do a travel plan. So now I'm going to hand the screen over to Abby Matera, who's going to talk about the program in Vermont.
Thank you, Carol. That was great and such a good setup for Safe Routes to School, and I think the following 2 presentations. So hello, everybody. My name is Abby Matera, and I am the State Outreach Manager for the Vermont Safe Routes to School program. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience working on Safe Routes to School across the state. So as it's likely that many of you know that Safe Routes to School is made up of 5 program elements, or the 5 E's: education, enforcement, encouragement, evaluation, and engineering. Schools undertake activities in each E to form a robust and sustainable Safe Routes to School program. Today I'm going to focus on the areas that planners typically get involved in, which are the evaluation and engineering components. So evaluation is a crucial component to any Safe Routes to School program or planning process. These methods of collecting data will help to inform Safe Routes to School program activities. For example, initial efforts may want to focus on resolving high crash areas along primary routes to school. Having that hard information available can focus the strategy and provide compelling need for infrastructure upgrades. It can also lead to identifying alternative routes that, if possible, avoid this area. Over the next couple of slides, I will explain these evaluation methods in more depth. Speed study and traffic counts are an important tools in identifying traffic issues along school routes. These tools are outside of a school's typical expertise, so they rely heavily on local planning staff to help gather this data. Often schools will come up with a solution before properly defining the barrier. So as planners, it's really crucial step for you to get involved with. Speed studies and traffic counts can determine if the installation of passive and active control devices are warranted. Again, as a planner, you can help schools understand what the tools are, what available options there are to address congestion and speeding issues, including low-cost items like pavement markings and signage, for bigger projects like roundabouts and traffic signals. Schools tend to feel uncomfortable with the technical details of this work, so the more transparent and simplified you can keep your explanations, the better. Maps are powerful tools in communicating and relating data. When I start working with a school, I ask them to collect 3 types of data. One is the student travel tally, so we know how kids are currently getting to and from school. One is the parent surveys, which helps to identify parental barriers and concerns. And one is I ask the schools for student addresses. This helps determine how many students live within a walk-in bike shed, where there are clusters of students, and what are the crucial routes that can funnel most kids to school. The map on the left is an example of a student locator map, with distance from school measured by the street or path network. With this map, we can start to ID primary routes to school. Children, like adults, are often looking for the shortest path to their destination. So it's best to focus planning and infrastructure efforts along these routes. Once we determine primary routes, we can assess the infrastructure that currently exists. The map on the right shows a parent, the primary routes to school, and where there is sidewalk infrastructure. A parent can find where they are located on the map and choose the closest highlighted route to school. This is not only great for helping families identify better routes to school, but also for funneling your students onto the same route, giving them a bigger presence along key routes to school. Not all routes need pedestrian and bicycle accommodations to make them safe. Many neighborhood and low-volume roads can be safe routes. In these circumstances, education becomes a key factor in making sure students and families know how to navigate these streets safely. Another thing I'd like to point out about these maps is one can be used for planning purposes and the other can be used for promotion. The student locator map is usually an internal working document because it contains sensitive information. Of course, it's showing you where students live, so we use that map internally. So here's an example of how you would take an internal working document and create an output that can be utilized by your community. Once you have gathered and mapped student locations, you can set up a walking school bus route or bike train that will serve the majority of your students within your walk-in bike shed. For those not familiar with those terms, a walking school bus functions just like an actual school bus. There's a designated route with stops along the way and adult supervision. Riders are on foot instead of being in a vehicle. You can join a walking school bus from the start or along any of the stops along the way. It's great to have a starting location that can accommodate parents or bus drop-off. That way, those who live outside the 2-mile radius walk shed or bike shed, or those who currently don't have a safe route to school have the opportunity to join the walking school bus and walk to school. One other thing I'll point out about the map on the left is that it displays even more information by incorporating the grade of the student. So you'll see in each bubble there's a number or it says K, so that represents the grade. This is helpful when you're determining how many kids you can anticipate walking or biking to school. The older kids typically are willing to walk and bike further. This information is also useful if you want to pair older students with younger students in forming walking groups. As many of you already know, walking audits or walkabouts are a powerful tool for community input. As much as leaning over a map and discussing barriers is helpful, actually physically taking people out into the community to look at existing infrastructure results in a much better feedback and understanding. I urge you, when you work with schools, to be sure you include the students. Students have a powerful perspective that is often overlooked. Their perspective is different than adults because of their heightened sight lines, knowledge of local cut-throughs and unmarked paths, as well as their general familiarity with routes. They often they add crucial information to the conversation that's often overlooked by adults. With Safe Routes to School programs, these are the people we're planning for, so providing kids opportunities to get involved with your work makes it much more successful. And students make willing and eager participants. I helped lead a walk audit last week with about 60 fifth graders, and it was really interesting to see all of the things that they noticed, like not being able to sit on the sidewalk while walking 2 by 2 with a friend, or how they prefer the routes with shade and tree growth. How they felt more comfortable when they had greater separation between themselves and the moving traffic. And they also pointed out things like the smoother sidewalk was preferred for different cut-throughs in that neighborhood. They also shared their behavior. So what do they typically do when they get to school, including what crosswalks they avoided and what houses they avoided because of scary dogs and other elements. Lastly, it offered a teaching opportunity to talk to students about how to walk and bike safely on these routes that had varying levels of infrastructure. Okay, all of this data and more can be included in a school travel plan. I think as planners, this is a great tool for you to begin a Safe Routes to School program or pick up an inactive Safe Routes to School program or even make a current Safe Routes to School program more robust. Safe Routes to School offers a travel plan. Meeting offers a unique opportunity to bring together many diverse stakeholders into the same room. Often I find towns and schools are not communicating about needs and projects. The town may have a project that they think serves the school, only to find out later that the route is not being used by children or that higher needs exist elsewhere. School travel plans define formal meetings between the town, school, and other stakeholders. Typically, travel plan meetings include health professionals, environmentalists, law enforcement, parents, school staff and administration, local nonprofits and service-oriented groups, public works, planners, either firemen, children, select boards, school boards, and the list goes on. The relationships built through creating a school travel plan help foster communication that goes well beyond the Safe Routes to School program. So throughout this process, the team creates a vision statement, and the statement is used to guide problem identification and solution through the 5 E's. Many barriers can be overcome by what we're calling soft E's, so it's important to think beyond infrastructure. For example, if you have adequate sidewalks but no one's using them, then employing encouragement activities like walk to school days and walking school buses will be more effective than widening sidewalks or adding more crossings. Or if the concern is that children are currently walking with traffic and riding facing traffic without helmets, then employing a bike and pedestrian education program in PE class and reward system for positive behaviors might be a strategy you use. After you collected your data, held a walk audit, observed arrival and dismissal, and collected feedback from the greater community, you can make planning level recommendations. These recommendations are incredibly valuable to the school. They become short and long-term goals that tie schools and local governments together over the long term. To take a step back for a minute, I want to talk about town and city planning in general. It is good practice to plan for our most vulnerable populations, children and our seniors. The question I have is, are you including these groups or at least keeping in mind these groups when you plan? Often starting with your schools is a way to improve the infrastructure and accessibility in your town. The bike and pedestrian infrastructure resulting in a Safe Routes to School program will be used by your entire community, especially when your school is located near your core or shares the campus with your library, recreation center, or other community gathering space. Not to mention that your school community is one of your most predictable daily commuters. Any improvements to allow children to safely walk and bike to school will greatly impact your town's congestion and overall livability. So when you plan, do you have representatives from the school at the table? School routes stretch out wider than you might think. So even if you feel like your project is outside the school zone, it may very well be on a crucial route to school. Short-term wins are important for long-term buy-in. many large projects that take many years to complete. So long-term projects take many years to complete, but in the meantime, local stakeholders may become frustrated and drop out of participation. Short-term improvements, including updating sidewalks, striping narrower travel lanes, adding bike lanes, stamping school zone in the pavement, painting sharrows, or improving or updating school zone signage are easily accomplishable in the short term and go a long way to improving safety. In the short term, can you focus your efforts on filling gaps in the existing network and address unsafe crossings? Also consider your off-road system and see if there are opportunities to work with local organizations to create trails or linked recreation trails so they become viable transportation networks. Ideally, you would identify and incorporate schools' needs into the town master plan, or perhaps you have a master bike and pedestrian plan. And also, the huge help in schools is providing grant writing assistance when opportunities become available. Often, Safe Routes to School recommendations fall on town, city, or state land, so the town or city would have to be the applicant for the school. In some cases, when the improvements fall on school property, the town planner can help the school prepare an application. Some common ways to fund Safe Routes to School engineering recommendations include transportation alternatives, state bike and pedestrian programs, and grants from metropolitan planning organizations. Again, Safe Routes to School can be used as a tool to build community capacity and understanding of local planning efforts and opportunities. Together, a coalition of diverse partners makes a successful Safe Routes to School program beyond school borders. So just a quick example of one of our Safe Routes to School partners here in Vermont is in St. Albans. This is a city of 7,000 people, making it our 7th largest city in the state. The St. Albans City School serves 701 students in grades K through 8. When I first started working with them last year, they only had approximately 25 students walking and biking to school, despite having 95% of their students living within 2 miles of school. Through their creation and implementation of a Safe Routes to School travel plan, the school created 7 walking school buses led by school staff and community volunteers. In addition, the town prioritized improvements along these routes to make them safer by installing new signage, including a rectangular rapid flashing beacon on a busy state road, repainting and upgrading crosswalks, and prioritizing snow clearance along these routes. Students became involved by requesting the town to use a more durable paint for crosswalk markings. Since then, the town has purchased new equipment to be able to paint thermoplastic instead of the water-based paint previously used. Their first event was International Walk to School Day last year. We had 80 students and 18 adults participate. They held these events each month, even throughout our pretty harsh winter. And every month they added more and more students. Their final event was in June, and it was 250 people arriving to school by foot or bike. This year they are kicking off weekly walk to school days with the 7 walking school buses, and they're seeing 200 students regularly walking and biking to school. So really, I encourage you all to get involved with your school to determine if they have a Safe Routes to School program and engage these schools through a school travel plan process. And then, of course, to incorporate the school priorities into the greater bike and pedestrian plan or master plan. So with that, I will turn it over to Anne.
All right. Thanks, Abby. I definitely learned a lot from your presentation and took some notes. My name is Ann Schnecke, and I'm a transportation planner for the City of Tucson. As a planner with the local government, I really appreciate those that work at the regional, state, and federal levels because all of your efforts make it possible for me to get projects going on the ground. My presentation today will talk about Tucson's Safe Routes to School program, and specifically we'll focus on one particular school and several projects in the surrounding area of the school. The projects not only make it easier for students to walk and bike to that school, but also connect the neighborhoods in that area to key destinations and to the larger bicycle and pedestrian network in the city. So before I jump into the safe routes, I do want to take this opportunity to make a plug for Tucson. I, of course, encourage everyone to visit Tucson and experience the unique Sonoran Desert. Bicycle planning and investing in bicycle infrastructure in the city of Tucson is not new. The first bike master plan was adopted in 1975, and the city hired its first bicycle and pedestrian coordinator in 1989. So decades of bike planning has resulted in over 1,000 miles of bikeways in the Tucson region and in our county. So we're a gold-rated bicycle-friendly community from the League of American Bicyclists. Tucson has had a strong Safe Routes to School program for over a decade, thanks primarily to the county and the region. So in 2002, Tucson and the county were awarded a joint transportation enhancement grant for $500,000 to launch Safe Routes to School. With this initial grant, there were 8 pilot schools who received assistance developing school travel plans, which both Carol and Abby talked about that. They also worked with schools on coordinating walking school buses and much more. At this point, this county-led program doesn't have the capacity to work comprehensively with the schools. However, this educator right here, who's wonderful at what he does go into about 30 schools each year. And he does a 2nd grade curriculum focused on walking, and then a 4th grade curriculum focused on bicycling. However, as one person in a city of about 600,000 people, it's been a challenge for me when I have schools and other people calling and saying they want to let their kid walk and bike to school, but it's challenging for them because of various barriers. And so I don't have the capacity myself to go meet with schools all the time and to develop school travel plans. And so one of the first things I did when I took this job with the city of Tucson was sought funding to create our own Safe Routes to School program. And so fortunately, thanks to Transportation Alternative Program funding, I was able to secure funding for a Tucson Safe Routes to School program. And as I mentioned, being one person, I knew I wasn't going to be capable of doing this new program. And so through an RFP process, we were able to get the local nonprofit advocacy group, Living Streets Alliance, in partnership with Tool Design Group, to run and operate the program for us. So this is still relatively new. The program really just started working with the schools in August. There are 4 pilot schools, which will provide comprehensive services, a menu of Safe Routes to School options, and then they also help coordinate regional events and provide regional resources to any K-8 school throughout the region that asks for help. You can see in this picture here, this is actually the Living Streets Alliance Safe Routes to School coordinator, Sarah, preparing. This was taken this week. She's preparing for the International Walk to School Day next week. And they also have organized a Walktober challenge for the pilot schools they're working with. One great thing about Living Streets Alliance administering this program is the aims of Safe Routes to School closely align with their mission, as you can see here. The partnership's a great example of how the Safe Routes to School program enhances both the City of Tucson bicycle and pedestrian initiatives, but also Living Streets Alliance's existing goals and programs, and how those goals and programs can complement the Safe Routes to School efforts. So for example, Living Streets Alliance has already been doing neighborhood walkability assessments. They organize monthly critical mass rides, and they coordinate our open streets event, Ciclovia Tucson. So now, throughout these pilot schools and hopefully in the future more schools, they'll be doing walkability assessments in the school neighborhoods. They'll host critical mass rides starting at the schools in which they're working with. And they also do a lot of outreach to encourage the students and their families to attend the Ciclovia events. So now I'm going to move into talking about one particular school to really provide an example of what I mean by safe routes and the different partnerships that make this type of program really successful. So the school I'm going to talk about is Robeson Elementary. It is a classic neighborhood school, and you can see, I know it's a little hard to read, but this chart over here shows that at the time in which we made this chart, there were 240 students who live within 1 mile of the school, and another 93 that live between 1 to 2 miles away. So that's almost 350 students that have the ability to walk or bike if they have the resources to do it. And so right now there's only 32 of them that have been walking and 4 of them that have been biking. So you can see there's a lot of potential there. However, you can see the crash information for this area. These are reported crashes. There's a strikingly high number of reported pedestrian and bicycle crashes within a half mile of the school. So given that, you can see why parents may be hesitant to allow their student to walk or bike. Thanks to Google, I threw this map together really quickly. This is to get more context of how the school fits into the surrounding area. Here's a map that covers roughly a 3-mile range. And you can see this is Robeson Elementary here. You can see there are a ton of destinations within a few miles of the school. So some of the key ones, University of Arizona is over here. Downtown is over here. There's a community college up in this top left. There's key parks. There's commercial activity along these major streets, libraries, and there's a major employment center over here as well. So here's a zoomed-in view of what the current bicycle and pedestrian facilities look like near the school. So over here is a big park, and there's a shared use path that surrounds the park. It's about a 1/4 mile from the school currently. Over here, northwest of the school, is kind of a dangling, very tiny shared use path piece. And then down here, south of the school on what's called 22nd Street, we have a couple pedestrian hybrid beacons. That's because this is a major arterial. It carries about 45,000 cars a day. And so these were put in within the last 5 years to connect the neighborhoods south of the school to the school and to the different destinations north of that road. So you can see right now there's not a ton of infrastructure to help walking and biking, but today I'm going to talk about 4 key projects that we have that hopefully will change that in the next couple of years. The first one, I'll talk about some residential streets adjacent to the school that will be enhanced to become bicycle boulevards. I'll talk about a Safe Routes to School grant that will fund some key improvements to connect the area to the school. I'll also talk about a green infrastructure project that's going on right now where we're working on capturing stormwater and adding shade in the area around the school. And finally, I'll talk briefly about how we're going to connect that dangling shared use path so that it enhances the connectivity of the whole region. So first up, I'll talk about the bike boulevard projects you see here in red. I'm guessing almost everyone on this call is familiar with bicycle boulevards, or they're also called neighborhood greenways. But here's a summary of what we consider to be a bicycle boulevard in Tucson. It's a local residential street that prioritizes bicycle travel. And also the improvements that go into a bike boulevard also really enhance the walkability. And so Tucson's really looking at bicycle boulevards as a great way to get out new riders, since the alternative in this city, which is definitely, Carol mentioned, auto-oriented versus complete streets, Tucson developed around the automobile. So we have a lot of bike lanes on really busy arterial streets. So we're looking at the bike boulevard network as a way to really enhance our bikeability and try to get our ridership even higher. We know that tapping into our existing grid residential street network is one of the most viable, cost-effective ways to do that. The NACDO Urban Bikeway Design Guide fortunately has some information about bike boulevards and the design elements that go into them. In a city like Tucson, I will say, I want to point out number 6, that the major street crossings are really important for us. We can't have a neighborhood bike boulevard that is really nice biking in the neighborhood, but when you get to one of those major streets and you have no way to get across it. So the street crossings is what ends up taking a lot of our time and energy. So at this point, Tucson has identified a bicycle boulevard network for the entire city. So far, we only have 10 miles on the ground. However, there's about another 20 miles that are funded that are in design right now. And we're hoping within the next 2 years, we'll have more around the lines of 40 miles worked out. You can see that these two bike boulevard corridors that have been identified are the ones that link to Robeson Elementary School. So I know this map on the left is a little hard to read, but I'm going to talk about one of those bike boulevards, Treat Avenue. So Treat Avenue, we do have some funding to convert it into a bicycle boulevard. Unfortunately, we don't have all the funding we need to do all the elements that are desired, but so that's a prioritization process that we're going through now. But so this bike boulevard will connect to a major shared use path on the north up here, and then also connects to a bike path on the south here. Goes along the entire stretch, north-south part of the city, lots of neighborhoods. You can see over here a lot of schools within a quarter mile, and then a lot of Tucson Falls within 1 mile of this bicycle boulevard. Today, this is what the corridor looks like for the most part along most of it. Working with several planners, we developed a master plan for the Treat Bike Boulevard, and I pulled out the section that's close to the school on this side. So here's the school. You can see that there are a lot of improvements that we're hoping to put in near the school to make the Bike Boulevard really serve young students walking or bicycling to school. Just wanted to point out a few key ones that will appear in a few minutes. Here's a traffic circle up here. There's some additional traffic circles, some chicanes, and also a pathway connection to connect this pedestrian hybrid beacon to this neighborhood down here. And so in preparation for planning for the open house for the bicycle boulevard, we took a photo of this intersection, which is really close to Robeson Elementary, and gave an idea of what the bicycle boulevard improvements could look like and how that will enhance the school environment. So related to the Bicycle Boulevard project, there is a separate specific project specifically to helping getting the students to and from Robeson Elementary. The background image on this, for some reason, isn't working. That's weird. Anyways, Tucson applied and received Safe Routes to School infrastructure funding under the last round of Safe Routes to School funding that was administered through our state DOT. This project includes some of the Bicycle Boulevard improvements, but also has additional safety features surrounding the school. Fortunately, you can't see a lot of the ones I'm going to pull out for you right now, but improvements include traffic calming along that Treat Bike Boulevard, such as traffic circles and chicanes. It also includes ADA ramps, and that was a specific request from the school principal. They had a student a couple years back who was in a wheelchair who was unable, they lived pretty close to the school, but because of missing ADA ramps was not able to travel along the sidewalk network to get there. It also includes a new walking path in an alley and a new pedestrian hybrid beacon that will link the school to the park. And this is a photo of where that new pedestrian hybrid beacon will be going to connect the neighborhood with the school to one of our largest parks in the city. Here's a picture of the existing hawk. However, you can see that if you're in a wheelchair or a young kid on a bicycle, you either have to travel right now into the traffic or be on the dirt path, which much of the year is traversable, but when we have monsoon season, it's really challenging. So as part of the Safe Routes to School project, they'll be connecting the path and making it something that's easier for everyone to access the pedestrian hybrid beacon. So another project I've been working on lately is a green infrastructure project where we're looking at how to capture stormwater and enhance the landscaping on the Treat Avenue Bicycle Boulevard near Robeson Elementary School. This green infrastructure project is a collaborative effort led by a local nonprofit called the Watershed Management Group, or WMG. So Watershed Management Group has a lot of local planners. Their primary goals are water, working on enhancing water and also sustainability for Tucson. So they work on capturing rainwater and creating more desert landscaping and shade in Tucson. They've been getting more involved in green streets work lately, and last year they applied and received a grant through the Arizona State Forestry Department to inventory shade trees along a bike boulevard and get in a couple pilot planting locations working with the neighborhoods and surrounding communities. This has been a great collaboration for many reasons, and we plan on duplicating this project for other bike boulevards. So to kick off the grant, we invited the surrounding neighbors on a walking tour you can see here. And so during that walking tour, we not only talked a lot about rainwater harvesting and aspects of that part of the project, but it also gave me an opportunity to talk about the bicycle boulevard and the different elements that will be going on the bike boulevard. And here is actually the lawn of Robeson Elementary School. So one of the first steps for this project, Watershed Management Group created this map, created the shade idea of how much shade currently exists and doesn't exist along the bicycle boulevard. There was enough funding in the grant to select 2 locations and actually create basins with landscaping, including shade trees. One of the 2 that was selected was at Robeson Elementary. So as part of this grant, here is the principal actually digging away to prepare for a shade tree. As part of this grant, the principal had decided it was time to get rid of the lawn that required a lot of water and instead to put in some native desert landscaping. Well, the grant only had funding for 2 sites. Fortunately, the local ward office in the area had received a lot of calls from this particular neighborhood asking that a traffic circle be put in this intersection, and one that was pretty with landscaping and shade trees. And so the local ward office had some unused funding at the end of the fiscal year, and so they called me and said, if you have funding to put in the traffic circle, we'll fund the landscaping and the labor to make it a nice traffic circle. So this picture shows Watershed Management Group working with the local neighborhood associations to vegetate this traffic circle. So this green infrastructure project not only involved the elementary school, but the City Department of Transportation, who I work for, the ward office in that area, funding from the Arizona State Forestry Department, the neighborhood association, and of course the ringleader was Watershed Management Group. And so last but not least, when talking about the different projects in the area, I'm going to talk about that shared use path and how we're going to connect it so that it can actually serve students and residents in the area. So this is an initiative from the City of Tucson's Park and Recreation Department, and they're working on connecting the large park here east of the school through the neighborhoods, through the school, and into downtown. You can see here, this is the school. This section is not built yet. It has been designed. It has been permitted. Still looking for a funding source to make it happen. But part of the shared use path actually will be on the school property. And the school has already indicated that it's fine to use their right-of-way to connect this path. And so in summary, Tucson Safe Routes to School project helps educate and encourage thousands of students to walk or bike to school. However, through collaborations with many different organizations and efforts, Safe Routes to School efforts help work towards the city's overall goals of increasing walking and biking across the city while improving safety. And so with that, thanks for listening. And we're going to take questions, and I believe Gabriella is going to moderate the questions.
Hello. Yes, I'm like wowed by Tucson right now. I think that Anne needs to get a badge for like being such an incredible champion of Tucson. There's really great stuff happening there. I just find that Tucson would be a very challenging place to do amazing planning, and that's awesome that they can do that. So I'm going to start the question and answer section with some of the things you've already touched upon, but essentially I'm curious to know what techniques you all have implemented in projects that have resolved multimodal conflicts, particularly bike and pedestrian conflicts. In Los Angeles, we have the majority of our bicyclists being very militant still because they're still establishing their presence, as our citywide adopted bike plan is pretty much brand new. And so I'm wondering what we could do to help resolve the conflict between, the militant bicyclists and safe rights as we establish these safe routes to schools. Anyone?
This is Ann. I'll jump in and I'll say that's a great question and something that I think will continue to be a challenge. I will say that I think my approach towards that is really focusing on this new wave of cyclists and families in schools and really promoting things like critical mass rides and the Ciclovia Tucson and those events that make biking fun and really reach to a way broader audience. And I think through that community, hopefully we can help balance the folks who are a bit more militant in their riding and in the types of infrastructure that they're asking for.
And I guess I would add to that it's a lot of our work is just educating people on actually who has the right of way and making sure people understand that bicyclists are considered vehicles and are offered the same roles and responsibilities as cars. So ideally, from a planning perspective, you would have it very clearly defined where, if bikes and cars can share lane, or if there's a separate bike lane or bike path for bikes, making that clear and offering that space. I tend to see a lot of the conflicts are happening in places that don't have the width to accommodate both, and that's okay on low volume roads, but on high volume roads where bikes are often passed by cars who have to move into oncoming traffic, it becomes a really dangerous situation, frustrating for everybody. So I'm not familiar with the particulars of LA, but I would say that if they're actually providing the infrastructure, I think bikes probably should exert their role as vehicles until everybody is comfortable with the process of both being legally and rightfully allowed to share the road.
So this is Carol, and I understood the question also to include places where bicyclists are not yielding to pedestrians. And I think part of the solution that we've seen is to build, where appropriate and where there is the need, parallel facilities that serve two different rider types, or pedestrians and riders. So instead of relying on a shared use path, for example, that might lead to a school, and assume that bicyclists and pedestrians are going to use that path, go ahead and build the path, but really focus on it for pedestrians. And maybe less comfortable bicyclists, but then build a buffered bike lane or just a regular bike lane in the street if there's room for those bicyclists that are more vehicular bicyclist style, so that you separate them by facility. I agree with Abby that education is really important, and I think where appropriate, enforcement can be important. And then from the softer side, get some of those bicyclists involved in the Safe Routes to School program, perhaps leading bike trains, so that they become invested in, or even walking school buses, so that they become invested in those kids and their well-being.
Great. So kind of tangential to that, we have a question from Charles that says, these are techniques that seem to be more easily adaptable to smaller communities or neighborhoods where most children walk to school. However, in more urban districts, especially those with large attendance zones, most parents are driving their children or having them take a bus. So how would this program best be applied in these circumstances?
I can actually jump in on that. Okay. This is Abby. So I would say that across the board, the reason the Safe Routes to School program exists is because most children, the parents' default is to drive them or for them to take the bus to school. And working on this program in Vermont, which is very rural, we have to do a lot of the adaptation of the program to make it work for different communities. So I would suggest, since you're urban, really mapping and starting with the kids who are within safe walking and biking distance. So we typically say kids will walk up to a mile and they'll bike up to 2 miles. And then for those outside those radius or outside the routes that are currently safe, having some opportunity for them to park at a church, at a grocery store, finding some place for the parking lot so that parents can park and walk to school there. Like I mentioned in my presentation, if you have a walking school bus route, start it in a place where either a bus can pull in and drop off children, or your parents can park and walk part of the way to school. So at least you're reducing the congestion and the pollution around school and letting kids have the experience of walking and biking to school. That's the way that we find we can include everybody in the program, but still incorporate a walking school bus that can serve the kids that are within safe walking and biking distance to school.
This is Carol. Let me add a little bit to that as well. First of all, the Safe Routes to School program has a number of goals and some smaller objectives. And one of the things it tries to do is reduce congestion around schools during arrival and dismissal, much of which is caused by parents feeling that they are being responsible by driving their kids to school and picking them up. So we certainly encourage taking the bus and would, in larger districts where the attendance zone is very large, maybe you start by encouraging parents to have their kids take the bus, a walk to the bus stop program. So that's one thing. The other thing is where you have, in rural areas, a single large campus with all schools on it. I know in Virginia, for example, oftentimes there is a lowly, small populated county that has a single campus with an elementary, a middle, and a high school on it. And children can learn good walking and biking skills and become more active by having a good on-campus non-motorized transportation program. So pay attention to the sidewalks and bike lanes. If it's a large campus with lots of schools and there may be administrative buildings as well, think of it as a mini city and develop that network. And then, as Abby said, have some walk and bike at school events so kids can practice the skills as well. The last thing I'd like to point out is something that Ann mentioned, which is whatever else you're doing in terms of transportation, trails, repaving, a sidewalk repair or construction, it can be related to getting to school, and so capitalize on those things as well where it makes sense.
You know, in the city of Los Angeles, which is the jurisdiction I work in, primarily dealing with the land use perspective and zoning, we have, when schools come in to establish themselves, particularly charter schools, we make a requirement of the school that the parents have an adopted pickup and drop-off route, and so it involves them being part of the process by taking turns with being the crossing guard and things like that. But also, the really good charter schools take it upon themselves to have contracts with parents educating them about the bicycle route and how the drop-off and pickup works. And so they work with our transportation aspect and requirements in order to create the circulation, because a large amount of our new charter schools are going into really densely urban areas, and so we work collectively to kind of come up with the best route to minimize the conflicts with cars and pedestrians, because it's Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Awesome. Moving to another moving towards the funding aspect of this, we had a great question from Brian, and he was asking if you know of any Safe Routes to School programs that are being funded or structured by states to replace the Safe, Accountable, Flexible, Efficient Transportation Equity Act, a legacy for users, or the Safety LU Act. I'm wondering if any of you have that information.
So this is Anne. I will say our state government, for the state, I will say no. Once Safety LU and dedicated Safe Routes to School funding went away, it was our state has decided not to continue with the Safe Routes program. However, if working with the local government and with the regional government, now that the regional government has a set-aside, now that MPOs have a set-aside transportation alternative program funding pot, that is the pot that we look to continue our Safe Routes to School program. In our case, the pot's not really big enough anymore to really do infrastructure projects. So small programmatic projects are perfect for that MPO pot of transportation alternative program funding.
And this is Carol.
Oh, thanks, Carol.
Yeah, this is Carol. In Virginia, we, in anticipation of expending all of the non-infrastructure Safety LU money, the state DOT wanted us to continue our work and identified an on-call mechanism to have us continue, and that was some planning money that they would be using. And so they were willing to do that because they felt it was, they were very pleased with the way the program was progressing after they had, funded local Safe Routes to School coordinators with some of their non-infrastructure money and saw the benefit at the local level for that. I will say they learned after they had, we were about to be under contract to continue the program with that planning money through the on-call mechanism, that they did have enough Safety LU money to continue the program through the on-call mechanism, but not having to use planning money. And I don't know if in a year after all the Safety LU money is used up that they'll choose to continue and go back to the original plan of using planning money. But they were certainly willing to do that.
When you have a good program going, people seem to loosen their pockets, we find, everywhere. So that's just the nature of our field. They need some proof. So here's a little bit more of a more creative funding opportunity for these programs. Given that some schools are reluctant to participate in broader community projects, can joint use agreements help to bridge that gap?
I would say yes. Maybe Anne has some experience with the multi-use trail or the special, near the school that you profiled. Is that by joint use agreement?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah. And we're finding with some of our work in Virginia that there are schools that are co-located with recreation centers, and the recreation centers have an agreement with the school to use the school gym for some activities. So, it gets back to that orientation or the values of that community, where the school is considered a community asset, and you'd look for opportunities to do those joint use agreements.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, given how little land we're dealing with in terms of new opportunities, we're struggling with our local unified school district to be creative and have those joint uses where we're able to have a good bridge between lack of open space and community space provided in the after hours that our schools are not being used. So it's kind of achieving a lot of really good goals when we're able to coordinate that and make it happen. So thinking about school location being paramount, should resources be directed to those communities that locate schools well to help them improve a good situation, or should resources be directed to those that place schools poorly away from where, in a distance from where children are mainly centered to help overcome their quote-unquote error of judgment?
Is that a trick question?
It's more of an ethical, technical question.
This is Anne. I'm going to jump in here. I didn't say anything during the question about what happens if you have charter schools or a lot of schools in which students live really far away. And I think these two questions, in my opinion, can be related. In Tucson, we absolutely have that situation. Our state doesn't value education at all. And so we have a situation where parents are driving their students 15 miles to a school that's of better quality. And so I still feel like, and in the case with a school being sited really far away, I still personally see a lot of value in having Safe Routes to School programs in those schools. And that's because the tools that you learn through Safe Routes to School may not be employed by parents allowing their kids to walk or bike to school, but as soon as they come home and they want to go to their friend's house, or they want to go to the local store, or all of those, to me those skills are still really important to keeping kids safe biking and walking and teaching them that it's really fun to walk and bike.
And this is Abby.
Go ahead,
I was
Abby.
just going to say that if there could be money going towards preventing these small neighborhood schools from shutting down and locating a mega school in the fringe, that would be ideal. But I agree with Anne. Being in Vermont, we have some very rural schools with enrollment sheds 30, 40 miles out. So obviously, those kids aren't going to be walking and biking to school, but they can still learn how to walk and bike safely. It doesn't mean that they're not walking and biking around their neighborhoods. And there's an opportunity with the education to happen at the school. But then also, these schools love the ability to do a park and walk or a walk at school event. So they still participate on their own level. So I think it's more about directing the money where there is, for us it's been about where there's a passion to get people walking and biking to school, and that's turned out to be a variety of rural to urban schools. But that's a tough question. I would like to see these small neighborhood schools not be closed down so that we don't have to worry about these mega consolidated schools in the fringes.
This is Carol. I also didn't say anything about the charter schools, and I've experienced in Washington, D.C., you know, you either have a charter school that takes over in a building that was a public school, and in a community like D.C., the walking and biking network is, in most cases, pretty good. But sometimes in D.C., I've noticed there have been charter schools that have started at new locations, and they pick a piece of land that's relatively inexpensive, which the one that I worked with was in kind of a light industrial community and on a busy road, and there weren't good pedestrian and walking facilities. So I looked up what the requirements were for a charter school, and there were no siting provisions at that time. This was about 5 years ago. There were square footage requirements and, you know, things inside the space and on the campus, but the siting criteria was absent. So in the case of charter schools, I would say, you know, take a look at the criteria and try to avoid a problem.
That's like a really great set of responses, I think, that are really useful and practical. I'm amazed still that Tucson has ciclovia. That's like really awesome. I think that's incredible. So
I will say I went to LA Ciclavia and I was overwhelmed. So
okay, because I'm imagining it's like ours, and you know, ours are pretty substantial. So I'm imagining that in Tucson, and I'm like, wow, Tucson, you're so into it. What happened? How did this happen? Awesome. I think that covers everyone's questions. Oh, I think we just got one more Oh, we got a couple more, actually. Can you discuss how school start times impact the number of walkers, especially during non-daylight savings months? From Elisa.
This is Abby. I think it hugely impacts the number of kids who walk and bike to school. Our schools that start early, you'll see in the afternoon, they almost double the number of kids who walk home but get to school by car. And through the parent surveys and other mechanisms of collecting data, it comes up all the time that it's really difficult with an early start time to get your child up, eat breakfast, and out the door in time to leave, enough time to walk to school. So in St. Albans, the example that I showed, these kids are catching a bus at 6:30 in the morning to get to school because of the route and how it stops at every child's door. So implementing the walking school bus actually let the child sleep in more because it was shorter. It took less time for that student to walk to school than it did for them to get on the bus and bus to school. So either the child was sitting on the bus for a long time and getting up really early, or the parent said, forget it, I'm going to drive the child to school. So having that walking school bus and providing an opportunity where the parent didn't have to drive to school, where the parent could drop their child off or walk their child through a walking school bus stop and walk to school, kind of affected a lot of barriers. But we had a couple of schools this year that turned their start time up. So they went from an 8 o'clock start to a 7:30 start, and their walking and biking population dramatically reduced because of that. And like I said, we see more walking and biking home for that same reason. So it's been interesting with this discussion that's come up about how kids are getting up too early and teenagers need longer time to sleep and all of this stuff. It's really pushing towards a later start time. I think that'll help both with daylight, but also allowing parents and families the time in the morning to get their children out the door.
This is Carol. I see this question as not only an issue of the start time of schools, but a more local government issue about lighting. We oftentimes in our travel plans when we do travel plans, hear from parents that there needs to be lighting along this sidewalk, or it's inadequate, or lighting at an intersection. And I would just encourage all the participants to say to themselves, who's responsible for the lighting in my community? And oftentimes it's not you. It's a power company, or it's the state DOT, or it's the county. And the ability to have light where it's needed and pedestrian-oriented lighting, not those big cobras that go over the street, but lights that actually light the area where kids are walking. That's the challenge, and I think it needs to be, it's one thing to work on, one of the many things to work on.
Great. Well, I think that we've addressed everyone's questions, and I can't tell you how much we from Transportation Planning Division appreciate our presenters who did an amazing job and really know their stuff and are able to communicate it in a way that planners can understand. And so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, ladies. You are incredible. And so I encourage anyone to please think of their great work and submit it for a webinar, because we learn best from each other. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add, but again, thank you very much. We are very excited to have this as part of our Transportation Planning Division webinars, and hope that you become a member of our division if you aren't one now.
Thanks, Gabby, and from the Planning Webcast Consortium, thank you for organizing today's webcast, and to our speakers for providing such deep and intimate knowledge on safe routes to schools. I want to encourage people to log their credits, and when the credits are available, we found that they're still pending, actually, and you can go to your APA dashboard, look by provider, which is the Transportation Planning Division, and find the title, Connecting Safe Routes to Schools to the greater community, or search by the number 28413. And we do have more webcasts coming up, and if you have an idea for a webcast, as Gabby said, please contact us either through the Utah website or through, you can email me directly at bfrost@nhhfa.org. Thanks very much, and that concludes today's webcast.
Oh, one quick reminder, Carol is telling me that next Wednesday is Walk to School Day, so take advantage of it.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Get
Have
out
a
and
great
walk.
weekend. Yay.